Right. So let's look at section 2, the characteristics of nonverbal communication. When you are writing your essay, you do not have to focus on all 7 of them. You're going to think about those, the 1, 2, maybe 3 that have occurred in whatever you're writing about. But it's important to understand all of these. So let's look at them. I know there's a lot on this page, and I'm sorry, but okay. Nonverbal communication is always occurring. It is impossible not to communicate. I mean, I suppose when you're sleeping, you're communicating that you're tired. But if you've ever tried to just sit there, you say, I'm not going to show, I'm going to make my face blank. I'm just going to sit here. You're communicating something. You're communicating that you're not communicating. Okay. Nonverbal communication is mostly relational. Back in chapter 1, we talked about how any message you send has 2 main parts. There's the content, and that's the words you're using, and then there's the relational part of the message, and that is generally conveyed by tone of voice or possibly with the gestures that you're doing. Sometimes you are conveying emotions that you don't want to express directly. So for me, this one is the typical, someone has said something and they're not looking, and you're behind them, and if someone has said something and you think it's dumb, or they've said it too many times, and so you roll your eyes like, oh my gosh, and they happen to turn around and they catch you. Okay, so you would not say to that person, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're bringing this up again, or that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, but your nonverbals will express how you feel about that person. I like the exercise. Well, it's not really an exercise. The book has 5 sentences, and imagine how you could express these things non-verbally. I'm tired. What would you do? How would you let people know that you were tired without saying anything? It could be a sigh, but that could also mean I'm sad. You just slump, you yawn. Okay. How would you express non-verbally, I'm in favor of capital punishment, or I'm not in favor of capital punishment? You can't. So it is. We use nonverbals when we are talking about emotions that are maybe a little challenging to express. Okay, so I wanted to, one more point with this, tone of voice comes in here. Like, think about the different ways you could say, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. You know, there's all different ways, and you've communicated how you feel about the topic or how you feel about the person. Okay, I've beaten that one to death. Nonverbal communication is ambiguous. We're in the classroom, and I ask you a question, and you don't say anything. What does that mean? Does it mean you're not paying attention to me? Does it mean that you're thinking? Does it mean that you hate talking in class? It's hard for the receiver of this message to know. So as the receiver of a message that is ambiguous, what do you do? So we're in class, and I'm going to say, we've had class, and then at the end I say, hey, Dawn, when I asked a question, I noticed, I was asking the question to the whole class, and I noticed that you turned your head away, and I'm afraid that I maybe offended you. Okay, there's a perception check, right? What was the behavior you saw, and what do you think it means? Okay, we, as bright as we are, as perceptive as we are, we still don't know everything. So rather than assume that you know what someone meant by that sigh, by that expression, My husband tells the story about when he was in school. There were two girls sitting next to each other, and one of the girls did something, and everyone in the class started laughing at her. And she looked at the girl who was sitting next to her, and the girl was making a funny face. And so she thought her friend was stifling a laugh, so she slapped her. And I'm sorry, this is a little disgusting. And when she slapped her, the girl actually pooped her pants because this expression on her face was, "I have such a bad stomach ache." So, it would have been nicer for everyone if she had actually said, "Are you laughing at me, or is something else going on?" Okay, I probably should not tell that story again. Okay, number 4. This one is usually not used in essays because most people don't look at mediated communication. But we don't think of nonverbals occurring in mediated communication, but don't you ever use emojis or emoticons if you don't have an iPhone? Or I guess only old people use these. I have a Bitmoji. I should copy it if I could. Show you what my Bitmoji looks like. It's a way that I will make a little joke, and I'll text it to 3 of my good friends, and sometimes they will respond with the I'm laughing so hard I'm crying. I was like, it's not that funny. Okay, but that's how you can express things non-verbally. What about, I did not know this, and I think I have told you before, I believe in punctuation, so I always punctuate when I text, and I did not realize that there's a difference between, let's say my daughter texts me and she says, "Can we go to the store when I get home?" And I text back, "Sure, period." I didn't realize I was giving her attitude. Okay, you have to tell the older people in your life these things because we don't know them. All right, and also, if somebody sends you a message, a text, an email, and you take a long time to respond, what does that mean? I mean, I'm guessing you have all been in a situation where you've contacted someone via mediated communication and you haven't gotten an answer, and you haven't gotten an answer, and you're going through, they're mad at me, or mine is always something happened and they're seriously injured and can't text. Maybe I thought it was funny, but I insulted them, and my husband will say, "Oh, I had my phone off." Hurrah! Okay. The 5th characteristic of nonverbal communication is that it is influenced by both culture and gender. Oh, sorry. Gender is underlined. It shouldn't be. I would like you to, there is a video that you can take a look at. It's called, there's something online called The Flip Side, and basically what they do is they have men acting using stereotypically women's words and behaviors, and women using stereotypically men's words and behaviors. So I put it in there just to lighten the mood. I'm not a huge believer in these stereotypes necessarily, but take a look at it and see if you can say, wow, men don't act that way, or women don't act that way. Okay. But let's look at the culture part first. So people use emblems, which are culturally understood substitutes for verbal expressions. And you see a picture of the Buddha with his hand together like that. Well, in the U.S., something very similar to this means, okay, all right, I understood you. That is not what this means in other cultures. So you have to be very careful. Michelle, I think you told a story about this being unacceptable when you were visiting family. Okay, so in the United States, we are more expressive nonverbally. We use bigger gestures. Other cultures are a little more contained, and they don't gesture as largely. Okay. There are some nonverbals which are, let's see. In the United States, we if you think about emojis, okay, what are the differences from one emoji to the next? And a lot of times the biggest difference is in the mouth. If you look, and I don't know this for a fact, this is what the textbook has told me. If you look at Japanese emojis, the bigger differences are in the eyes. Huh. Okay, so it's gonna, culture affects how nonverbal cues are monitored. We maybe will look more at the person's mouth, and the mouth gives us more of an idea of what people are feeling. In Japan, they would have a tendency to look more at the eyes. Okay, so interestingly, some nonverbals are universal, but the ways in which they are used varies. So a smile, in as far as we know, just about every culture means you're happy, but how big you smile and if you show your teeth, that varies from culture to culture. But I thought this last point is really interesting. Females overall, females are more nonverbally expressive than males and are better at interpreting others' nonverbal behaviors. So listen to this. Gender also influences nonverbal communication, and with rare exceptions, differences between sexes hold true across cultures. In general, women are more nonverbally expressive than men, and they're more accurate in interpreting nonverbal behaviors. So, as I keep getting back to, and this is my own ideas, I haven't researched this. If gender has to do with what culture says men and women should do, or how men and women should behave, and these characteristics are the same across almost all cultures, maybe it's not influenced by gender. Maybe it is influenced by sex. Okay, women smile more, use more facial expressions, use more gestures, but not big ones. They use less expansive gestures. They touch others more, stand closer, are more vocally expressive, and make more eye contact. Okay, so really, even though there are some differences, I just lost my train of thought. There are more similarities than differences. So this was something that we talked about. I asked people to think about this when we talked about language. Do you think that gender is a big determiner in the differences in how men and women use language, or is it something else? Do you think gender is a big influencer of how men and women use nonverbals, or is there something else? Okay, and it's probably not a yes, no, either or. These last two are not in the textbook. They're in a previous edition, and I think they are important, so I included them. So nonverbal communication is vital. If a person is not good at encoding or decoding nonverbals, they are perceived to be less popular, less attractive, and they tend not to fit in socially. So many people who are on the autism spectrum have a hard time reading nonverbals, and they tend to be, I'm not saying all people, they're a little bit on the outside of the group because they can't read what's being expressed nonverbally. So my son is on the spectrum, and as a child, he had a horrible time understanding nonverbal communication, and he's gotten much better now. But he used to stand we would go to the library, and kids would be playing on the computer, and he would stand right behind them. I mean, right behind them, like breathing on them. And then they would look at him like, dude, back up. And he would stand there until I would physically have to pull him away because he was not picking up on the nonverbals. So there is also something that is called a nonverbal learning disorder. And it's people who cannot read nonverbals. And so they're also not good at sending nonverbals. Okay. We will talk about emotional intelligence in chapter 8, and being nonverbally sensitive is part of emotional intelligence, and you'll understand that when we get to chapter 8. And number 1, all behavior has communicative value, I think really ties into it is impossible Nonverbal communication is always occurring, and it's impossible not to communicate. So anything you do, even if it's unintentional, it is communicating something. We might not be perceiving it correctly. All right, so here are my questions for you. Do you know what the 7 characteristics of nonverbal communication are, or can you at least think of the big 5 that are in the textbook? If you don't understand some of them, please reach out to me and I will talk about them in more detail, because I want to make sure you understand this for the upcoming essay.